Today's class, we will deal with the subject, the fundamentals of environmental pollution and control. This subject, before we begin to take up, let me discuss the issues related to environment. We will go in great detail about the definition of the terms. It has a very important significance because in many cases, there are misinterpretation of environmental terms, but let us go back to some basic statistics about how environment has been damaged over the years, over the period of human civilization and the state of the earth today. You see, many of you, who are reading newspapers regularly or watching TVs, you would appreciate that there is many cases, like many situations are being discussed with environmental issues in mind. Like in very recent time, if you see that this winter, we find that the environment around us is somewhat not as chilly as it used to be, or as cold as it used to be. It says that is one of the reason being put behind it is that the wind current, actually the wind current that brings in the cold environment in a particular area has been restricted by the generation of excessive heat waves in some part of the country and some part of the earth as well. As a result of which, the hot condition, I mean, if you can say this as hot, because in many cases it makes a tremendous difference if a temperature which is supposed to be, say, at -25 at one place is suddenly -10 or -15 degrees centigrade, or here in case something like where it should be, say, about 20 degrees centigrade, it is being found as 25 degrees centigrade. This makes a tremendous significance. The reason being is there will be many things which would be associated with that. That is something like the few examples, like farming would be greatly affected. One of the reason being is farming would be greatly affected. Similarly affected would be this life of various organisms which are generally at the lower level of the food chain. At the lower level of the food chain, so who support the upper level of the food chain. We are at the top of the food chain, but below that there will be very small organisms, microorganisms, which are actually feed to finally form, feed up to the ladder to form, to go into the food chain. So this has a tremendous significance in the sense like this. So there are many issues, like as you can say, global warming is an issue where you say that is being said that throughout the world, this for every decade there is an increase of, say, about now there is an increase in the global temperature by about 2 to 3 degrees centigrade, or about, say, 4 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. This has tremendous significance in the sense that there are certain areas, like particularly near the poles, where there are ice cappings which generally do not even melt during our summer. They are beginning to melt. There will be some ice caps in the mountains of Himalaya which will begin to melt during the summer, which usually in, say, 20 years, 30 years back, or even 50 years back wouldn't have melted during summer also. Now it would result in water being flooding the area. Excessive flooding would take place. It would change the climate pattern. Say one part would find more water being flown in, and in another area it would remain as dry for a longer time. There are many areas, in India as such, there are many areas where time for drought has increased. If you go to some part of southern India or even in western India, there are many areas which have not witnessed rainfall for last 4 to 5 years. No drop of rain. And essentially this makes, what not with certainty we can attribute the reason to any environmental factor, but there is a certain kind of correlation now being developed. Now scientists are finding that it has a reason. I mean that the warming or any other reasons can directly contribute to the less and less rainfall in a particular area. There are many scientific debates, because in many cases you will find that in one case the scientists say one thing, another scientists dispute that. There is a possibility that this kind of things beginning to take place. Like, let me tell you, this is one of the major hindrance for a larger global action towards environmental pollution and control. The reason being is something like that Europeans or even in the particularly the research groups in Europe, and predominantly Europe, and also several other countries like Japan, or even some more developed countries like South Korea, scientists begin to believe that the global warming is a cause for various kind of environmental disasters taking place. But don't confuse with tsunami. Tsunami is not an environmental disaster. We will discuss about this. It's a natural disaster. Don't confuse tsunami with that. So here, what we see is ultimate impact of such an effect, like global warming or acid rain, or say ozone hole depletion, or any cases like this, will have a direct impact. This can be, as I was telling, that the scientists from different part of the world dispute with the scientists of another block of the world. Say, well, only yesterday, I was reading a newspaper item where it said that one advisor to the state of United States, to the cabinet of United States, disputing the European theory that global warming is actually a cause of various climatic disturbances throughout the world. Now, it is a very complex situation. The situation is that development of a particular country, development of a particular place is directly integrated with an impact on the environment. There cannot be any development without any impact on the environment. This kind of qualitative development has not been possible as yet. It is possible in a sense, maybe someday it is possible when we'll have in the world a better distribution system. Distribution system, what I mean is, suppose there are in a society, say if some wealth is created, if this wealth can be equally distributed among the people, it is generally observed that environmental performance increases. If a certain commodity is equally shared by us, we become more responsible. It is generally observed. But on the other hand, if the resource is inequitably distributed, like only few of the people get and the rest of the people are deprived, in such a situation we generally say the environmental related tensions increase. So this environmental impacts is not necessarily a matter of concern for the scientists or people in general. It is also a matter of great concern to politics. A large number of state and central politics related to that are basically connected to environment. So people take different postures. So people generally say, in many cases people would say that development without harming the environment. It is not possible. In today's world, it is not just possible. If you are going for a material development, if you are going for a larger buildings, if you are going for a big flyovers, say big dams, big infrastructural projects and things like that, environment is suddenly going to be affected. There is no denying the fact, and it has been observed that with whatever remedial measures that we have been doing at this present point of time is not adequate enough to control the damage or control to reduce the damage. The damage is nonetheless taking place. So, even in such a cases, let me give you a simple example. The government of India estimates that in about 8 to 10 years time, in about say for about 10 years time from now, say till about say 2020, India is going to grow by say about 7 to 8%. What it means? It basically means that the material use that we would be making general would be increasing 7 to 8% every year. Like if you are using say one AC today, it's very likely projection wise, if you say 8% increase, say about 12 years time, you are going to use 2 ACs, or quantitatively that can be put. I mean, your use of the environment would be twofold within 12 years of time or 13 years of time. So, this is what is significant. Significance in the sense that we have, remember, we have always a limited natural resource. It's not like any kind of, all kinds of natural resource, like the natural resource that we generally talk about, say particularly renewable resources and non-renewable resources. Like non-renewable resources, mostly, as in most cases, is that the fossil fuels are non-renewable resources. There are renewable resources. There are other kind of resources which may be non-renewable but cannot be recovered at the present state of use. So there can be a third category. The use has been so much at the present time, it cannot be replenished back to the system. Now, this is what it means, so physically what I want to mean is that, our lifestyle patterns would change in a manner in 12 to 13 years time. If we continue to grow in the same way, would be like we would be using twice the amount of water that we use today. We would be using twice the amount of paper that we use today. We would be using twice the amount of, say, the materials like, minerals that we use today. So, this is what, it has a tremendous paramount impact on the environment. Now, the question is, can you compromise? This is, a very, very pertinent question in the sense that, whether you can compromise. To my mind, what I would say is that this compromise is only possible when there is a global conformity. That means, the states of America, the states of Europe, states like India, China, all agree to grow in a coherent way, with mutually discussed methods or plans. But that is not happening. In fact, if we observe the global affairs today, the differences are more than that used to be. Because, America thinks in one way, Europe thinks in another way, China thinks in another way, India thinks in another way. So, it's all these countries are taking up their own steps. They are in their own way. All they are trying to see is that, the public reaction is not against them. People are not generally against them. So, this is what the people, they are trying to play to the politics available, I mean the kind of the situation they are in, and generally trying to manage things more than putting their heart into actually doing the right things. It is not a case of India as such. It is not a case of a country in particular. It is about all countries of the world today. There is a great lack of leadership in areas like environmental engineering or environmental impact remediation, reduction. There is throughout the world. As such, there is basically very little leadership to cling to, so that on which you can depend on. Now, having said that, let me give you some of the ideas. Say some ideas that we can expect, like say about the world population, as you can see, is the demand for resources. If you see this demand for resources, we just discuss about the increase in population, I mean, is an important thing in the sense that, if you just see, today we have, say, about somewhat more than 6 billion people, about, say, 6.25 or 6.3, and growing at a rate of 1.6%. This is the growth rate, global growth rate. As you can see, if you can see now, it is projected by 2020, it would be about, it is going to be more than or equal to 7.7 billion. This is at 1997 figure. This is about 1997, or say even 1998 or like that. This is what is 2020. So beginning this, you can see this would have, you can see this, one thing can be very well, I mean, for all of you to understand here is, this much of increase would lead to more than the percentage change in the population. So is percentage change, if you see this, the demand for resources would at least increase, the demand for natural resources would be more than or equal to 7.7 minus 6 divided by 6. This is a practical significance. So you can see here, the way, the requirement would actually drastically increase. In today's fragile environment, if you can see this would be nothing but, say, about, say, 1.7 divided by 6, which would lead to, say, about how much percent? Say about 30%, 25 to 30%. We are now, you will see that, in the, as we go in the lecture itself, we will see, how we have depleted. So this is a great demand. Say 25 to 30% increase in, say, about, say about 15 to 16 years now, from now. So 15 to 16 years, you can see in every average about 2% increase every year in terms of natural resources. Considering that we have already damaged a large part of the environment, this is huge. This is tremendous. I mean, 2%, 100 years before would have not meant the same thing that we mean today. 100 years before or 200 years before, this 2% increase would have been insignificant. But today it is not. Today it is a huge amount of resource, huge amount of material that would be actually spent on these purposes. So this is one thing that is, we will just begin to, this is one population, that we said, having said all this, there will be many more aspects. Like another very important thing is this, is taking place is fresh water scarcity. Fresh water scarcity. This is also related to population. I mean, there is no denying the fact that, this is related to population. This is population pressure. Is certainly one thing. Industrial development, because almost all industries require water, a great amount of water. This, say, industrial development then is infrastructure, agricultural uses, it is being said, if today's war is being fought on oil, tomorrow's war would be fought on water. Water is going to be an extremely scarce resource. It is actually, if you can see, there is, you can take down a line here, there are no resources, there are no fresh water or freshwater resources, both surface water as well as groundwater, in the world which are not impacted by environmental degradation. Scientists have found in the Antarctic water kept under ice, the traces of organic pollutants produced by human or anthropogenic activity. Anthropogenic activity. This term has a great significance in environmental pollution and control. We will see that this is much of the environmental pollution or degradation that we will discuss about would actually be related to anthropogenic causes. We will make a distinction also as to say which are the natural causes of environmental problem, natural causes of various problems, as well as anthropogenic causes that have led to environmental problems. So we'll discuss about that later on, but let us keep on these things. Particularly this problems of fresh water is going to be a huge problem. So what I mean to say is, there are no sources of both surface and groundwater resources in the earth today which have not been influenced or impacted by industrial activities anywhere in the world. Not only that, there is another important thing. You just write down traces of gaseous pollutants like have been found across the continents from the sources in a country that traveled several thousands of kilometers across the continents you can make a correction there across the continents. In the water resources, So, in the water resources. So, environmental problem is no longer confined within a state or even within a continent, across different continents, The intercontinental pollution is a topic of great concern today. Both for the scientists and the policymakers, both for the scientists and the policymakers. So that this is what is that. For example, just like say, if you are carrying out a certain industrial activity in India, its pollution might reach Bangladesh. So even if Bangladesh, say for example, for a particular case, may not be indulging in any kind of activity which likely to give rise to pollution, it will be impacted by the activities in India. So you see the complexity of the problem here is, Bangladesh will be in a position to charge India about polluting its own country. Similarly, say across different continents, it has been observed, the gaseous pollutants of United States, the traces have been found in Britain. It has the pollutants has actually crossed the Atlantic and went up to Britain to find a residence there, to have settled there, or it has moved. Particularly related is particularly for particular pollutants like which are highly resistant pollutants, like the pollutants, mostly the pollutants that we talk about, say about say this mostly the organometallics or higher organics, like more than the complexes which are or metal or organic complexes that generally derive from, say, upper range of the benzene ring. They are highly persistent. Most of these pesticides, these pesticides or any other substances, they are highly persistent. They do not degrade. They can remain in the environment without being affected for a long time. Many persistent chemicals, like the mostly say all the kinds of industrial washing agents, many of them, they are so persistent, they would remain. The traces can remain, say, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, or even 10 years in the same state without being changed. Now, this is a great concern. I mean, this is a great concern for water pollution. In many cases, this has resulted into different kinds of problems of treatment. So, is the freshwater scarcity, the gap in another important aspect of, say, this the gap in living standards. The gap in living standards. It is generally observed, the UN also says, says that you can just write down a person will be environmentally conscious if he or she earns more than $5,000 a year, more than $5,000 a year. This is generally an observation by different policymakers and study analysts, like $5,000 a year. Only then, say, you cannot expect a person who is a subsistence farmer, or a particular person who has a very low wage, to be environmentally conscious. You cannot expect, because he might be fighting for his basic necessities. You cannot blame him for various kinds of environmental problems that might be related to him or her. It is generally observed. So it's the gap of living standards. So what is a failure is total. We must say it's in a great term is that it is a great failure that we have the wealth. The humankind has generated so much of wealth. Today's world economy stands about $35 trillion. It's more than that. Out of this $35 trillion, if you just observe this, how this resource is distributed across the world, you will see that a large part of them would be America and Europe. Maybe about $30 trillion or even $25 to $30 trillion would be only confined in Europe, America and Japan. Rest of the world is only subsisting on about $5 to say $10 trillion. So this imbalance is and essentially this part of the countries or the continents is actually where the most of the people live. Most of the people live in these regions, but their sources of income, their welfare is so much less compared to the people of the other developed countries. Other developed countries means in the sense particularly related to America, Europe and Japan. So you see now it is very difficult sometimes to ask the developing countries or underdeveloped countries to take steps in environment, because for them it is just merely basic necessity. In effect, in many cases, as you can say, that the wealth is so much that if the whole world begins to spend or begins to lead life like the Americans do today, it would require 8 planets. You can understand the difference now. Say 8 planets should require, the resources of 8 planets should require if say about 6.15 or 25 billion people all over the world begin to go in the same way as the Americans go. This disparity is actually is a great nuisance to the control of environment. There is an appreciation in an individual level. When a teacher is talking to the students, he might be confessing all this thing, but mostly in the planning scenario or when in an international forum, people generally shy away of talking like this, because basically it's kind of a blaming one country and supporting the other. I mean, this is a bone of contention. You see, America refuses to sign Kyoto Protocol, saying that only when India and China would do, I'll do it, or will do it. So this is the kind of situation where there is a tremendous gap at one end, there is a tremendous demand at the other end. The demand for environmental pollution control checks, but two worlds are not actually coming together at the present time. If we see that there is only what is actually going on is micromanagement. small management of some issues here and there, and some policies, all very skeletal policies, but it is not actually going up anywhere. There is a sudden flicker of hope, though. There are many cases where world has converged also. We should not always blame the other countries or things like that, but there are many cases like in cases like Montreal Protocol as such, as that that has worked towards the reduction of say CFC in the world. It has worked. It has worked substantially. I mean, where the all countries of the world could converge into saying that they would reduce the use of CFC. See, CFC's fridges, and if we have seen all fridges or air conditioners or things like that in your home, say 5 to 10 years back, all were basically CFC fridges. Now these CFC fridges are on the way out. In India now, only the fridges which are small capacity fridges, refrigerators, which are small capacity, say about 165 liter or so, they are still in CFC. The capacity is more than say 165, 180 or 220 or things like that. They have all moved into non-CFC ranges. So there is an adoption. I mean, we must not say there has not been an environmental action, total collaborative actions from different sides. It has happened, but it has not happened substantially. It should have happened, and the urgency is more. We cannot wait. The situation is such that all our water regimes are impacted. All our water regimes are polluted. Wherever in the world, wherever you go and take off water from any sources, it may not be fit for consumption. This is the situation today. Fit for consumption not for humans, but also for other animals or plants or even species like that. So there is a great need. There is a great need, and in spite of that, if we think of in terms of growth, there would be always a more and more pressure on the natural resources. As I have explained, what would happen. So this, unless this gap of living standards come down, if a African fisherman or an Indian farmer are not involved in the whole work of environmental remediation, where we will be able to share our wealth with them. There should be a mechanism by which we can share our wealth with them. Till that time comes, there would not be much environmental improvement throughout the world. There has to be a greater need for sharing. Wealth cannot be accumulated at one's hand or at one's end only. It has to be distributed. Unless that takes place, the fate of the environment, the global environment, is not very good. It is bleak to say, because it's over the way we are heading towards, it would be extremely difficult. There is another issue, is this public health. Public health. This is public health is another issue which is of great importance. You know that there's diseases like, say, diseases like HIV/AIDS. Then the typical diseases have not gone down. Basically, if you say the children dying of diarrhea today, digestive diseases are increasing. So its public health part is also alarming. Large part of the world, particularly the sub-Saharan Africa. What I mean by sub-Saharan Africa is that sub-Saharan Africa is that there are South of Africa, as South Africa is a relatively developed country. There the people are relatively well off, but in sub-Saharan Africa there are a lot of people who are actually suffering before all because of public health problems. We have a severe public health problems in India as well. India, China, then all these South Asian countries, South Asian countries like in Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, all suffer from public health related problems. The reason is, the why it is important. In the basic case, why it is important. When a particularly, if a family if a family is suffering from diseases or the typical health problems, it is its ability to generate income for its own subsistence decreases. As a result of which, what happens is, they become ineffective, and as a result of which, their welfare gets reduced. So, because they are not in a position to earn, in such a situation, it puts at extra pressure on the environment. So, generally saying, the people who are generally hale and hearty and generally who are dispensed with good health, dispensed with a continuous flow of income, they are more environmentally responsive than who are not. This is what is the reason. This is why the public health is also important. Then there is a challenge to natural environment. Let me challenges to natural environment. Let me give out a description from my book. This is, since the end of World War II, you just can write down few lines. Since the end of the World War II, the global economy has grown over 15 times. The consumption of fossil fuel has increased by a factor of 25. And industrial production has increased by a factor of 40. This has led to atmospheric changes that have altered more in last 100 years from the start of industrial nations. More than that took place in the previous 18,000 years. 18,000 years. Abnormal climatic changes, . insufficient rainfall, rise of ocean levels, desertification, have reduced eighteen major fisheries of the world, 18 major natural fisheries of the world, on the verge of collapse, on the verge of collapse, on the verge of collapse. So what it means is our major sources of fish reserves, the major system, more than 18 such reserves have been completely destroyed or in the process of destruction by our industrial activity. So it's directly related to the damages that had taken place. You just write down on another important line: if current consumption rates continue, all tropical forests will be gone in 50 years of time, will be gone in 15 years of time, with a consequent loss of 50% of total global species. 50% of total global species. More than 10% of the earth, more than 10% of the topsoil of the earth are already damaged and in a state of disrepair, that means which cannot be repaired, in a state of disrepair. So you can see the state of the environment, wherever we are, whatever in a position we are in, is the impacts on the environment is certain. There is no denying the fact, and as we grow, as we develop further, there will be more strain on the environment. There is no denying, no escape from this fact. People try to generally in various discussions, seminars, conferences, you will see that people try to gloat over, saying that development can take place without affecting the environment. It cannot take place. It does not take place at any point of time. Any kind of physical development is certainly going to affect. So our policies and priorities should be in reducing the growth, balancing the growth, equitably distributing the growth, so that the benefits of the growth can reach to a larger population, and doing it very sustained way, that is in a very slow space, so that we can try to balance the impacts of the nature, and we can also at the same time we take a look about the other species on earth. It's not necessarily that we must be always looking at human centric way, where we would be mostly concerned about our well-being, welfare and well-being. Some important issues, like you just write down few lines: emergence of new economies, employment problem, inequality in wage, rise in terrorism and organized crime, conflicts at different parts of the world. These are the issues which may not which has a greater significance on the environment, although may not always necessarily be connected with it. Although visibly they might look they are not connected, but essentially they are also connected. It is very natural that the people of the region who feel that they are deprived, they would turn to hostile acts, they would turn to violent acts. So things are related, things are essentially related. So when you like to see them, all of them, we must not see at one point only. It has to be the global equity, the sharing of the wealth, controlling the growth of wealth, controlling the reducing the consumption, bringing in more people in the decision making, all are absolutely important in terms of environment today. Unless we take care of those things, much of the talk that we make about environment would be reduced to almost nothing. Okay, this is the state of the environment that I have discussed. You are in a position you would read more. I think you will understand more also. As we go into the next class, we will discuss about the environmental movement in the world. This is already seen, parallel to that, the impacts that I have said, parallel to that, there has been an environmental movement also. We will see that, different concepts have given rise, different concepts have changed, different concepts have been, either rejected or some are accepted, some have been developed further. All this we would see in the next class. Okay.